Hi, my name's Jennifer Bekki, and I'm a professor in the Polytechnic School within the Fulton Schools of Engineering at Arizona State University. I also serve as the Associate Dean of Inclusive Excellence for the Fulton Schools. My dissertation research focused on modeling and analysis of semiconductor manufacturing, and my scholarship now primarily focuses on understanding the impact of interpersonal and institutional support on the well-being and career trajectories of grad students in STEM. I've been a faculty member for 17 years, and along the way in my career, I've had the opportunity to be kind of like the first on several different occasions. I was the first woman that was hired in my actual engineering department when I started my faculty job back in 2008. And when I had my first child a few years later, I was then the first faculty member that actually had given birth to a child while having that job. Later, I was the first person to be program chair of the Engineering Education Systems and Design doctoral program, which is a program in the Fulton Schools that now my research program is most closely affiliated with. And right now, I'm also the inaugural, so the first Associate Dean of Inclusive Excellence in the Fulton Schools of Engineering. So that's a lot of stuff. But the point is, I've had these experiences where I was the first person to do certain things. And I think I would say that if I look back across those things, the success is that I had taken time to build healthy relationships with colleagues and friends all along the way. And those helped support me to feel confident to take risks with the new positions that I was taking, and also helped me to then be effective in supporting other people once I actually took on those roles. So my PhD was in industrial engineering, and my research was focused on finding new ways to analyze and leverage data produced by discrete event simulation models. The context for my research was semiconductor manufacturing, and the high-level goal was to find ways that discrete event simulation models of those systems could provide more useful data faster to stakeholders in the industry. And to do the research, I needed to build simulation models to serve as experimental test beds for my research ideas. This is like over 20 years ago. And to build the models at that time, I was using a tool called SLAM. And SLAM stands for Simulation Language for Alternative Modeling. And at the time, we accessed the SLAM interface through a Unix portal. And we used a programming language that nobody uses anymore. It's called Fortran. And that let us access the SLAM source code to create and run models using our own smaller codes. I was pretty good at building models in SLAM. I'd taken several courses where we'd used it, and I was really confident that it was going to be no problem to build and run larger and different types of models using that tool for my research. But when I actually started going about trying to collect data for some of the experiments in my dissertation, they were coming out really weird. And I really thought something wasn't right, but I couldn't figure out why. So I had two co-advisors for my dissertation, and one of them was able to get me access to like the actual source code for the SLAM tool itself. And I ended up spending about 4 months trying to work with that source code and my models to figure out what was going on and why the results were really weird. I eventually did figure out the issue, and that it was a limitation in the number of digits that the software could store. So in discrete event simulation models, there's like a variable that keeps track of time in the model. And the value that's assigned to that variable gets larger and larger as time progresses. And for my dissertation work, I was needing to run my models for a really long time. And as the variable storing that simulation time got large enough and exceeded the number of digits that the computer was able to store, it stopped being able to continue to increment. And that made all of my experimental results meaningless. Or said differently, in a way my kids would say now, the model just crashed out after it ran for long enough. Figuring out what that problem was felt satisfying. I felt in some ways it had been like exciting to access and go through the SLAM source code, and I had appreciated the opportunity to get to do that. It was the first time I'd ever seen like source code for an actual computer program. I'm not a computer scientist, I'm not a software engineer, so this was like seeing behind the curtain for me. And I was also pretty confident that I had correctly diagnosed the issue. But of course, the finding itself was really disappointing, and it was also scary because there wasn't a workaround, and I didn't have a backup plan for how I was going to be able to do the research I had planned. So it felt like a really big failure. I didn't know how to move forward. And on top of it, I had a colleague who was trying to also do something with SLAM that required her to run models for a long time. And so my findings meant she was stuck too. And here I kind of want to take a minute and highlight, because I think it's important, that I had a fellowship supporting me in my research during my PhD. So while these results were frustrating and scary, they weren't tied to a grant from my advisor or from a professor. So it kind of made it my failure and mine alone. And I think there's an extra level of stress when there's something going on that affects a faculty member's grant, because they're in turn responsible to the funding agency and for funding other students. So I didn't have that. This was just my problem, and it really only affected my dissertation. So retrospectively, all these years later, I want to highlight that that probably made it a little less intense than I would have felt if it was a cornerstone research program of one of my advisors' NSF projects or something like that. When I shared my findings with my advisors about the program and why I was getting these weird results, one of them had a really important reframe for me. He was like, okay, Jen, you just spent 4 months doing this. It didn't work out. We're confident in what you found about why it wasn't working. So now you've got to write your own simulation program from scratch. And I was like, what? I'm going to do what? Because I had never done anything like that. But I did do it in the end. And I think him saying I had to, and me really not having a backup plan or knowing what else to do, it really forced me to learn. And I will say that he also gave me the space to do that learning. He said, I'm not going to have any other expectations for you over the next little while, except to write this program, test it, and make it work. So at the time I learned C++, I wrote my own program. It wasn't easy. It took another set of months to do that. And then another more than a year after that to use the program to finally get the results that became my dissertation. But in the end, I really did feel like, wow, I actually did this. So I can share maybe supportive approach and then something that I did that I don't think was awesome, and other people can avoid that. So I had a really supportive research lab. We had a really rich environment with maybe around 10 to 15 PhD students plus 5 or so master's students and a couple of undergrad researchers. So it was a pretty big group, and it was a lot of people working in one area on similar projects. And a cool thing was almost everybody was from a different country. And so we had this really rich cross-cultural and supportive environment. And just to credit my advisor, he did cultivate that environment. He had us do social events, we play soccer, and it was really a special time. So I had a rich community of people that I leaned on, and I think that was a healthy coping mechanism. We all went through failures, we all went through challenges, and we all helped each other. Some of it was just like expressing understanding and caring, but some of it was also tangible help. So for example, one of the other guys in my lab, he was a computer scientist from his previous education. So occasionally, as I was trying to figure all this out, he would help me and he could bring in expertise that I didn't have. So some coping strategies were, one was leaning on people for emotional and instrumental help. Also, at the time that this was all happening, I was really struggling a lot with having panic attacks. And they were worse because it was a period of a lot of stress trying to get this program written and so that I could keep going on my dissertation. A coping strategy that was good is that I did engage with mental health resources to try to get better, but it took a long time for me to really get better, like years. And this was all during my dissertation and my PhD work. So I didn't share what was going on with me with my colleagues in the lab, nor did I share with my advisors that I was having this problem. It made my life feel kind of small and a little lonely. Some of my close friends outside of school knew, but it was hard. I was functioning, but not as well as I could have. When I was doing my research in the lab, I would have to go outside and take a lot of walks, listen to music, try to walk myself back from panic attacks. And nobody knew what I was doing or why I was doing this all the time. So I guess I would say that's probably a maladaptive coping strategy of hiding it and not feeling open to share. The experience helped me learn much more about coding in general and C++. And at the time, it felt like a lot of learning and not a lot of progressing on my dissertation. But ever since this experience, I actually feel like all these years later, I still feel much more confident in coding. A small recent example, it's this really small thing, but I signed up to teach a new course this coming spring. I've taught a lot of different classes, more than 15 since I've been a faculty member, but I've never actually taught a programming course. And now in the spring, I'm teaching one in a language that I don't yet know very well, but I also know that I can learn it. And I actually think it's reasonable to trace that learning orientation in the context of coding back to this experience in my PhD. So that's kind of a cool thing, I think. Also, another thing I learned the current me, I'm much more open about talking about my own mental health. I'm grateful I don't suffer from those debilitating panic attacks anymore, and I was able to get some good help. But I think today, if I was struggling, I would share more openly with people that I trust, because I think people want and need to feel connected to each other. And we have to be okay being a little bit vulnerable with people we trust to build those connections. So I know that talking about mental health struggles can make people feel weak. It made me feel that way too. I was scared to tell people because I just didn't know what my friends and colleagues were going to think. But now, all these years later, I recognize that all those people were and remain wonderful, loving people. I know they would have wanted to help. And I wish I would have told them, and I would do that differently now, because maybe they were suffering and they didn't tell me too. Somebody's got to be the first person to say something. So those are two things I learned. I have three pieces of advice. The first one is whenever you experience a challenge, don't overlook the importance of interpersonal support. It's really important that people lean into each other. It's really powerful. And on top of it, there's also a huge research base for how interpersonal support can counteract the effects of stress. So find the people you feel safe with. If they're in your research lab, that's awesome. But if not, talk to somebody you trust about what you're experiencing. It doesn't always have to be a mental health professional, though sometimes I definitely recommend that too. Second, if you are experiencing any mental health problems, reach out to the University Counseling Service as a starting point. They can often point you elsewhere if need be. I spent quite a few years avoiding taking that step, but it's worth it to get things taken care of and get yourself feeling better. There's a program called Dragonfly Mental Health. It was created by a woman named Wendy Ingram and some of her colleagues. And the thing I wanted to share is that she has like a tagline that she thinks scientists should be taking care of their brains the same way athletes take care of their bodies. I really like that. And my second piece of advice is that take care of your brain the same way athletes take care of their bodies. Invest in your mental health. The third thing I'd say is try to remember that if you already knew what was going to happen in your research, it probably really wouldn't be research. So failure is normal. It's part of the process, and it feels scary and disarming in the moment because you're at the low end of the power hierarchy in academia when you're a grad student. You might feel like this entire faculty member's grant is at stake, or you did something wrong. Now you might never get your PhD, or somebody else is going to publish that innovation. There's so many things that might feel scary and worrisome when you experience failure. But try to remember it's common and expected, and that if everything worked as you knew it would, then you might not have been doing the right problem. It might not really have been the important research. Thanks for watching Fail-Safe Science. My name's Jennifer, and I hope my story helps graduate students feel less alone and more comfortable talking about and taking care of their mental health while they're in grad school.